Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Let's start today's video with a masterclass in subtle revenge. A mother-in-law bet $10 her son-in-law wouldn't last, mocked their wedding, and spent years demanding grandkids. Decades later, the couple are still happily married and still quietly laughing about this secret she never knew about. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. 47 years, 0 grandkids, and 1 legendary secret. My mother-in-law didn't want me to marry my amazing wife. I wasn't rich enough to give her the lifestyle that she thought she deserved. She made that very clear from the start. She even bet us $10 that she wouldn't cry at our wedding, and of course she did. When we asked her for the money, she pulled out 2 $5 notes and threw them on the floor, saying, "That can go towards your inevitable divorce." And aside, we're still married, still in love, 47 years later. Anyway, once married, she immediately started in with the comments about when we were going to give her grandkids. At every family gathering, every phone call, every letter, always the same question, always the same pressure. It didn't matter what else we talked about or what was happening in our lives, the topic always circled back to when we were going to provide her with grandchildren, as if that was our sole purpose moving forward. About 8 years in, my wife and I started having more serious conversations about it. We realized neither of us were particularly keen on having children in the first place, and even more importantly, we didn't want her in our lives any more than she already was. The idea of raising a child with her constantly interfering, criticizing, and inserting herself into every decision was enough to solidify our thoughts. So I had a vasectomy. And we didn't tell her. Not a word. We just carried on with our lives and let her keep asking, hoping, and complaining. We kept her hanging on, waiting for news that would never come. It was wonderful. And we still laugh about it whenever she starts up about how she was too old to enjoy the grandchildren once the other siblings started having them. There was always an excuse about how no one considered her feelings or how she wished timing had been different. Meanwhile, we sat comfortably with the knowledge that she had never been owed grandchildren in the first place. She turned 90 this year. My wife and her sister started planning a secret birthday party for her. They tried to book her favorite restaurant and were told it had already been reserved by my mother-in-law herself. She decided that no one would arrange anything for her, so she would have to do it herself. Such a martyr. The way she told the story made it clear she expected everyone to feel sorry for her, to marvel at her independence rather than question why she assumed no one cared enough to plan something for her. We didn't correct her, and she certainly never asked if anything had already been arranged. She simply made her own plans out of habit. Decades of assuming she was the center of everything. Decades of expecting disappointment even when no one intended it. And honestly, in a strange full-circle way, it was the perfect reflection of her entire approach to our marriage, our lives, and the imaginary grandchildren she thought we owed her. And we still smile about it, because if nothing else, the vasectomy was the single greatest private joke my wife and I have carried together for more than 40 years. This one left me with a thought. How many childless by choice couples' decisions have been impacted by wanting to not continue generational trauma? Or by knowing that their problematic parents or in-laws will never give them peace if they have kids? And our second story. I finally told my brother no after 20 years of yes. I'm 39 now and my brother Todd is 41. The pattern with him started early, long before either of us fully understood what adulthood was supposed to look like. When I was 20, Todd damaged his car. His fault, his responsibility. But somehow in his mind, that meant I needed to hand over $2,000 to help him fix it. And because I was young and because I still believed helping family meant something, I did it. I didn't question it or set boundaries. I just thought, he's my brother. He'll pay me back. When I turned 22, I finally worked up the courage to ask for the money back. His response? He looked at me, dead serious, and said, "It's God's money." As if handing it back to me would somehow offend the universe? That was my first clue that Todd lives in a world with rules that only apply to everyone else. Fast forward several years, I was 29 and had a stable home with my husband and our 2 little kids, a toddler and a newborn. Todd came to live with us because, surprise, he'd burned through every option available. My parents gave him another $2,000 to get back on his feet, but somehow he still managed to break his car again. So my husband and I, wanting to help, handed him our 1999 Camry, a car we'd bought used for $3,800 just a year before. It wasn't fancy, but it was reliable, and giving it away was a real financial hit for us. And what did Todd do in return? Nothing. For 3 months, he lived in our house, ate our food, slept under our roof, and contributed zero. Not one chore, not one offer to help with the kids, not 1 ounce of gratitude. Instead, he demanded more money, more food, more favors. It felt like living with a black hole that swallowed every bit of help and refused to give back even a flicker of appreciation. Eventually, I hit my breaking point. I had a newborn, a toddler, a household to run, and my husband who was just as exhausted as I was. I told Todd he had to leave. It wasn't a dramatic, angry fight. It was resignation. A quiet sort of, I can't do this anymore. He ended up homeless for 3 years, which I genuinely hated to see. But by then I'd learned I couldn't sacrifice my family stability to save him from the consequences of his own choices. Now here we are again. I'm 39, Todd is 41. And nothing has changed. He tells me he maxed out all his credit cards and is 2 months behind on rent. He says he needs help, and because I apparently never learn, I gave him $2,000. Again. And 2 weeks later, he asked for more. No pause, no reflection, no attempt to adjust anything about his life, just more. My husband and I sat down with him for nearly 3 hours, an exhausting conversation in which we said no over and over. We told him we're done. We told him we don't owe him anything. We told him his life problems aren't ours to fix. And of course, he only calls when he needs money. If he's doing fine, we don't hear from him. If he needs cash, suddenly we're family. He told us he'll be living on the streets unless we give him more money. And for the first time in almost 20 years of this cycle, I didn't fold. I didn't panic. I didn't give in. I told him no. Whether he learns anything from it, I doubt it. But at least finally I learned something. And our next story. HOA tried to stop my disabled friend from building a wheelchair ramp. You never really grasp how heartless people can be until they're given a clipboard, a petty title, and a whiff of control. My best friend Mark has been in a wheelchair for years. He's one of those rare people who still manages to be kind even after life's kicked him in the teeth more than once. He waves at everyone, says good morning to people who ignore him, and shovels his own sidewalk with a modified snow rake in the winter. 3 years ago, Mark bought a modest ranch house in a quiet subdivision outside Columbus, Ohio. It was one of the few places with a layout that could be easily modified for accessibility. Wide hallways, single floor, decent yard. Only problem, the neighborhood was governed by a homeowners association. You can already see where this is going. For a while it was fine. He kept his lawn tidy, followed every rule, even went to an HOA meeting once. Then a few months ago, he decided to install a small wooden ramp at his front door. Nothing elaborate, just a gently sloped entryway so he wouldn't have to risk tipping backward trying to navigate the front steps. He hired a licensed contractor, drew up plans, and even painted the proposed ramp color to match his trim. Out of courtesy, he sent the plans to the HOA. He wasn't required to, but he wanted to keep everything transparent. 2 weeks later, he got a letter back that looked like it had been written by a bored bureaucrat with too much caffeine and too little humanity. The proposed structure does not comply with community aesthetic standards and would disrupt the uniform appearance of the neighborhood. That was their way of saying a wheelchair ramp was too ugly for their perfect little subdivision. Mark tried to reason with them. He wrote back, explained that he's disabled and legally requires the ramp for access. He even attached a doctor's note. Their response? Another letter, this time threatening fines if he altered the exterior of the property without prior approval. They even added that any accessibility modifications should be placed at the rear of the home where they are less visible to the community. Problem is, the back of Mark's house had stairs and a narrow deck. Building a ramp there was impossible. He called me that night, his voice cracking with anger and exhaustion. They want me to sneak in and out of my own house like a damn secret, he said. That's when I started digging. See, under the Fair Housing Act, FHA, and American with Disabilities Act, ADA, housing providers, including HOAs, must make reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities. Refusing to allow a wheelchair ramp is not just cruel, it's illegal. I told Mark to keep every scrap of communication, every letter, every email, every timestamp. Then he called a local disability rights nonprofit. They got him in touch with a lawyer named Rachel, a soft-spoken woman with a smile like she's already won the case. She took it on contingency, meaning no payment up front. She sent the HOA a formal demand letter quoting the exact laws they were violating and warning them of federal action if they didn't immediately approve the ramp. Instead of backing off, the HOA tripled down on stupid. Their president, a woman named Carol, claimed that the ADA didn't apply because it's a private residential community. She said the ramp would decrease curb appeal and set a bad precedent. One board member even told Mark to just use the garage if he needs to avoid stairs. When Rachel got wind of that, she filed a lawsuit for housing discrimination so fast I swear the ink was still wet on the last letter. During discovery, she got her hands on the HOA's internal emails. Turns out the board members had been mocking Mark behind his back. They called the ramp an eyesore and joked that next he'll want to paint his house neon to match his wheels. That was game over. Once those emails came out in court, the HOA didn't stand a chance. They settled before trial, but not before the judge made it crystal clear that their conduct was discriminatory. The settlement terms were brutal, for them at least. The HOA was forced to approve Mark's ramp immediately. They reimbursed every penny of his legal costs. They paid damages for emotional distress and discrimination. Every board member was ordered to attend mandatory disability awareness and compliance training. And to top it off, the HOA's insurance company hiked their rates for years. When Mark's contractor finally finished the ramp, I drove over to see it. It looked fantastic. Simple, sturdy, perfectly painted to match the house. It blended in so well you'd never know it was the reason a bunch of petty suburban tyrants lost their beautification fund. A week later, the HOA sent out a community-wide email, clearly written by Carol, about renewed commitments to inclusivity. No apology, just damage control. The neighbors, though, knew what really happened. A few stopped by to apologize for not stepping in sooner. Mark just smiled and told them, "It's not fine. I just wanted to be able to open my front door." Funny thing, that ramp doesn't just make it easier for Mark to get in and out. It also makes it easier for delivery drivers, for his elderly neighbors when they visit, even for the local kids when they roll their bikes up to his porch to say hi. I love how this ended. Mark got his freedom back, the law did its job, and the bullies had to literally pay for their ignorance. The image of that ramp being used by everyone, neighbors, kids, delivery drivers, says everything. Accessibility benefits everyone, not just the people who need it most. It's the perfect comeback, silent, practical, and impossible to argue with. And our last story. He used my parents' home as a party house. I used the law to bury him. In the late 70s, my parents bought too much house for too much money. The place had a basement tenant. The rent from the basement will cover the mortgage, my parents said, but the tenant wasn't paying rent, and after a few months, my parents missed a mortgage payment. The tenant was not even in the place most days. He had another place close to work. He'd just used my mother's place as a weekend party crash pad. I tried talking to him, but he had a really bad attitude. My father tried to evict the man, but was defeated by the paperwork. By the time my mother asked for my help, they were desperate. And I was a future lawyer. They had a mortgage to pay, and they needed the guy gone before the bank came knocking. The courthouse had a law library and nice people at the desk. With their help, I served and filed some forms. The tenant didn't care. He laughed and said I should tell it to the judge. When the court date finally came, the tenant was there, looking smug, as if the law weren't on my side. I soon learned why. I watched case after case get adjourned. First time up, the judge would say, and that would be that. The case would be delayed for another month or 3. But the tenant's smugness worked against him. The judge didn't like him, not one bit, and gave him the heave-ho, ordering him evicted effective immediately. I wanted to celebrate, but the tenant was smiling as he walked out of court. That caused me concern. An old paralegal helped me out. A judgment's just a piece of paper, he told me. You still need the sheriff to get him out. I'd been clutching my court order like a trophy, but the paralegal's words deflated me. Can the sheriff come right away? The paralegal laughed, telling me about writs and deposits, about sheriff's fees and delays. Is there any way around that? I need help. I was only 17 and my legal loophole antenna had not yet grown. There's no exceptions, the paralegal told me, adding that unless the man abandoned the place, I would need the sheriff. Thanks for the loophole, I said. The paralegal looked at me like I was nuts. 3 days later, the tenant knocked on our door in a rage because his key to his apartment didn't work. We found the place abandoned, I told him, which was technically almost true, sort of. It had been unoccupied for a few days, and when I entered purely to do a wellness check, the place had a decidedly occupied feeling. I felt obliged to call it into the police just to report it, making a record of it. Abandoned residential unit. Landlord moving contents to storage. Abandoned, the tenant said. And where's my stuff? The nice lady at the courthouse library had not been very impressed with my eviction loophole, but she helped me draft a release. You're going to need one, the lady said, after admonishing me for coloring outside the lines and making me promise not to pull a stunt like that again. Sign here, I said to the tenant, trading the release for the storage company's address. The tenant called me from the storage place an hour later, telling me what an a-hole I was, that I'd stuck him with a big storage fee. If you don't pay that storage fee, they're going to say you abandoned the unit. You don't want to do that. You lose all your stuff if you abandon the place. I hung up the phone. Edit. The place wasn't abandoned, not at all. What I did was totally illegal, which the law library lady schooled me on when I came in to brag about the loophole I'd found. She scolded me for 10 minutes for what I did. She made me promise never to do it again. I asked her whether I'd get in trouble, would it come back to haunt me, stop me from being a lawyer. You need a release, she told me, helping me draft one up on the spot, telling me to make the man sign one. I asked her, was it not just as bad to force someone to sign a release as to put them in a position where they need to sign one? In other words, if I hadn't done something bad, wasn't she doing something even worse? She was pushing 60, a litigation lawyer that had retired a few years before. She told me that at her age, she was a far better judge of sharp practice than I was. I asked her to explain. She said that I had a legal problem, and she was giving me legal advice. She was dealing with me as she found me, as a status quo. In other words, as a problem to be solved without regard to what I had done nor my reasons for it. I had every right, she explained, to seek a release for my misconduct. It was up to the tenant to assert his right and to get his stuff back without the need to sign release. If he insisted, I would have to give in, she explained. But there was nothing wrong with me asking for a release. It's never wrong to ask for a release. She could not conceive of a tort so bad that you couldn't ask someone to release you from it. So yes, it was an illegal eviction, but my mentor at the law library helped me through it. Well done, OP. Beating the system with its own flaws at 17 is a huge achievement. I hope everything turned out well for your parents. Professional tenants can do so much damage, and they just don't care about what a mess they leave behind. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.